to tell me, oh, no, it has nothing to do with the number of people that follow you or whatever. But I don't believe that because there have been certain, like the 20,000 mark. The day I went over 20,000, I must have had like 10 solicitations for sex in my DMs because Bridget made it so that I can see people's DMs to me, even though I'm not um, following them. And then I can pick on which ones I want to accept and which ones I don't want to respond to. You just delete those. And of course, I didn't even realize what that was. She had to explain that to me. But anyway, but so I can see when people DM me that are not that I don't follow. And I almost daily get them now where I never got them at all. So there is something tied to that. I don't know what it is. And so whatever on Rumble the threshold is for us to get bots, because Bridget can attest, when we first started doing this, we never had bots. Right, Bridget?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Yes, you're absolutely correct.
But there's some point that you get bots. I don't know how that works. I don't even know how many we're up to, but it's kind of funny. This has been a very interesting journey for us because I remember, and Bridget can attest to this, when Julie, who we lost, she had a medical, we didn't lose her. She just isn't part of our research team because she had a medical issue that she had to take care of. And well, I still hear from her, but she's just not part of the official research team. But back in the day when we first moved from True Social over to Rumble, and I set up the Rumble account so we could actually start doing the book club, book review over there and actually interact with people in the live chat. I remember going back on True Social and going, oh my God, we're over 100 people. Oh my God, we're over 500 people. And we literally did that because we couldn't believe that so many people were interested in the same things that we were. And it just continued to grow. Obviously, it continues to grow here. I'm very thankful. It still feels crazy to me, but that kind of leads me into the other thing that I want to talk to you guys about real quick. We had a Badlanders meetup. We do it like once every 2 months or 10 weeks, something like that. At my house yesterday, and there was probably about 40 people here, and it was an amazing group of patriots that everybody met up and was just exchanging information. And we had the Cates brothers here. Dwayne and Brian were both here. And after we kind of, mingled around a little bit, then Brian and Dwayne and General Quast and his wife, Joni, was here. And General Quast got up and talked for about 10 minutes, gave an amazing, and I'm definitely reshuffling who's talking when, because I was stupid and went after him instead of in front of him. I should have known better. But he gave an amazing speech about the time that we're in. And then I kind of, spent 10 minutes chit-chatting. What was interesting about it though is afterwards, because my husband, obviously, he kind of is in the background all the time. And there was a younger couple here that I think it was their first meetup. And they had never watched any of our videos. They don't know who I am. And my husband was talking to him about some of the stuff that we've discovered that all of us know about. And they were so excited about being with a group of patriots that are interested and as active as the group of people that were here yesterday. And obviously, one of the questions that a gentleman asked is, what can we do? Meaning, the masses. And of course, you have to go back to General Flynn's local action. Because if you look around the crowd that was here, they're from all over the state of Florida. There were some from very far south. There was somebody from Jacksonville. They drive all over to come to this event. And what was interesting is when you look out among the people. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Citizens Defending Freedom. They're in multiple states. Their headquarters is here, just south of us in our county seat, Bartow, Florida, in Polk County. And the Polk County chapter president is a good friend of mine, Robert. The lady that runs the education for Polk County. So they have like the president of the chapter for Polk County, and then they have like three people, three different specialty areas like legislation, governance, and education. Pam is the lady that runs the education, and she was here. These are all people that put their money where their mouth was, put their time where their mouth was, and they walk the walk. We had a gentleman that had ran for office in Lake Wells, which is a small town, again, south of here. And he swore up and down he was never going to run for run for office. And so again, you look around at the people that have gotten involved, whether it's doing the podcast like we do, and Brian and Dwayne, or that they've gotten involved and ran for office, joined organizations that are about freedom, like Citizens Defending Freedom, which is an awesome organization. And that's kind of, where we left off yesterday was you have to get involved. The time for us to sit back and let other people defend our country and got us in the shape that we're in now. And my husband also pointed out afterwards that even something as simple as working among family members that live local, or your, whatever your network is, if you're a golfer, if you play softball, whatever it is, if you've never taken the time to have a conversation with those people about whether or not they have the ability to survive for a couple of weeks if we were ever hit with an EMP or anything like that, that is something that most of us in our network takes for granted. We all have those supplies. We all have already done that. We have the communication capability. But there's a lot of people out there that hasn't even ever thought about that. And you have to, at least from my standpoint, have that conversation. You need to at least say, what have you done in order to protect your family? And something as simple as that, where you can collectively all have the same communication capability, whether it's some type of walkie-talkie type of capability, shortwave radio, whatever it is. If you all have it, then you can all communicate. If only a few of you have it, then you're not going to be able to help as many people. And so again, it's something that you can do. It's something you have control over. And those are the kind of things, people can have like, I hate using the word survival, but that is what it is. And there are classes in local areas for, and if there's not, do one. Do the research and do your own class. Find people that are like-minded and do it. Just do it. Act authorized and step out smartly and do those things. So getting on with our Prelude to Terror book, we're on chapter 18. And basically, we're up to the point in the conversation where, and again, once you've gotten into this as far as we have, what's amazing to me is all of the same people show up in stories about what we think are completely different areas. They show up in the same, in a different place in the same storyline. For example, if you guys listen to Warhamster and I's conversation about BCCI. We did several shows about it. Well, you will remember that Kamal Adham, Adham, was the guy that ran Saudi Arabia's intelligence network, basically their version of the CIA. So, of course, he shows up in Prelude to Terror because we know that the CIA, which this book is written by, with material from CIA agents, the CIA was behind BCCI. And of course, they worked with Kamal Adham. So he's going to show up in this book, and he has repeatedly. So the book in chapter 18, it's called Change Partners. The military power the Saudis needed in order to survive had to be provided by the United States. To pay for that power, the Saudis could dispense political and financial favors because of oil. On occasion, to prevent political repercussions, those favors need to be granted in secret. BCCI was one means to the end. Adham's removal came with the assassination of King Faisal and his replacement by King Fahd. Adham was not about to give up the reins of the covert operations. So as the main spy behind BCCI, he didn't have to. According to Sarkis Sohanalian, that is precisely why Adham did business with the private enterprise version of the CIA. For Kamal, trust is everything. He had to have a leader in the US that could be trusted. Bush was his friend. Jimmy Carter was not. The ties between Adham, Bush, and Shackley went directly to Bush's connection with a company named First International Bankshares, which was the single largest bank holding company in Texas. Bush went to work there in March 1977 and stayed for the next 2 years. He was a board member, a consultant, and chairman of the executive committee. That's a big deal. One of Bush's little noticed responsibilities as a director of First National was his appointment in February 1977 as chairman of the board of its London merchant bank called First International. It is through this merchant bank that Adham's petrodollars and BCCI money flowed for a variety of intelligence operations that would span the next decade, all the way through the Reagan administrations, which, of course, Bush was the vice president of. According to the Senate BCCI investigation and Morgenthal's investigation into BCCI, which I talked extensively about when we did our show about BCCI, for Jimmy Carter, Kamal Adham was the most important contribution of persuading his old friend Anwar Sadat to sign the Camp David peace accords. Adham personally guaranteed that Sadat that the Saudi Arabia would stand behind the agreement. But the Israelis were not totally trusting of Adham as their new Middle East benefactor. One of the reasons that Israeli intelligence services are so effective is an absolute refusal to take anything for granted. While Israeli intelligence had enjoyed an excellent secret relationship with Adham over many, many years, the Israelis had been much more comfortable with the Israeli-Saudi-American triangle as long as James Jesus Angleton was the American person in that triangle. They knew that Ted Shackley had expressed a deep interest in going into the oil business after he left the CIA. The Israelis understood just how to accommodate both of those objectives. As for Ed Wilson, he claims that he kept no secrets from Israeli intelligence and that Mike Pilgrim, a former Edwin Wilson employee, agrees, quote, "Let me put it to you this way. If Ed Wilson was indeed guilty of everything the newspaper has said about him selling arms and training Gaddafi's folks, Mossad would have killed him long ago," said Pilgrim, who is also a leading authority on terrorism. Quote, "Mossad knew, and two of his operations I know, Mossad was getting a take on or a cut of the pie. Wilson ran a bunch of airplanes that flew diplomats throughout the Middle East, including Gaddafi with his pilots. Some of his pilots being recruited through a French agency were not exactly what you call French men. The planes were also bugged. The sales Wilson made to Libya, the Israelis got a cut of those as well. The explosive training facility also had Israeli agents in place. You listen to the stories of the bomb factory and you look at the guys that went to that bomb factory, they were real good at blowing themselves up. If you were running a classic disinformation penetration campaign, you would not have run one better," unquote. Pilgrim went on to say that Wilson was no fool. You run with them, they'll kill you. The bottom line was that ultimately he was as much their asset as anyone else's, referring to Mossad. When he became no longer useful to either one of them, they left him hanging out to dry. Although President Carter had certainly offered a very public olive branch to the Arabs, the government of Saudi Arabia had no need for their olive branch because basically they owned Bush. Aden, realizing that the threat of Islamic fundamentalism was the number one issue facing both Saudi and Israel, also knew that an open Saudi peace treaty with Israel was impossible unless the royal family wanted to contend with a revolution of its own. But Egypt, a country with neither oil reserves nor the ability to forge a war on its own against Israel, could politically make such a peace treaty. Aden was aware of the cutbacks at the CIA. The investigations in the US Congress that had began in 1974 had basically shut down the Directorate of Operations. During this period, the amounts of money devoted to the enterprise began in the tens of millions and would grow to hundreds of millions as the Afghan war effort went into high gear, because we know that they're funded through the opium cells. Only a handful of high-level officials were informed about the source of the money or the BCCI bailouts of Nugent Hand and other agency operations. The Iraqi operation with Sorkis ran for the CIA in the early 1980s, ran into billions and billions of dollars. His income alone was around $100 million. Most of which he deferred until Iraq could better afford to pay him. Aden understood the level of talent available through Shackley's private network. In cooperation with the Israelis and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Aden led a strange profit-making intelligence alliance to help finance the war against fundamentalism that was sweeping the entire region. Aden's partners in Pakistan had a keen interest in making certain that their government didn't fall, as the Shah's had in 1979. The US and Saudi Arabia would reward the Pakistani government with billions of dollars for providing shelter for anyone they needed in the operation and to create the mujahideen that had been fighting the Moscow-controlled regime, which of course we know it wasn't Moscow-controlled. We know how that whole thing went down. The Israelis had been secretly selling weapons to the Shah's regime for years and had no desire to give up the market, despite the fact that public animosity to the new management in the Ayatollah Khomeini had basically come out against the Zionists in Israel. So the entire Middle East became a balancing act. Adam fighting the fundamentalists through the Iraqi surrogates in the Iran-Iraq war and tying up Moscow in Afghanistan by assisting the Mujahideen. The Israelis continued to secretly supply all of this to maintain the balance. Adam's relationship with Shackley was not the only one that he had at the CIA. He also had a relationship with a guy by the name of Walter McDonald. According to Crowley, McDonald has spent his entire career as a CIA man getting to know everything that he could about every member of the Saudi family. McDonald befriended them and remembered their special occasions, like birthdays, anniversaries, and those types of things. McDonald befriended them, and Walt McDonald's career was largely seen as undistinguished because Arabists had serious trouble competing for the director's attention against the Soviet division. But in 1973, during the Arab oil embargo, McDonald's knowledge of the royal family and his relationships made him one of the most valuable officers in the CIA. McDonald had grown close to Adam, who suggested that when McDonald retired from the CIA as deputy director for economics, that he should open up a private consulting company. McDonald did such a thing on his quote unquote retirement. He then joined Nugent Hand Bank. He became, in effect, Adam's man inside Nugent Hand Bank. Adam viewed Nugent Hand as a way for BCCI to fund its riskier operations. Isn't that interesting? McDonald was one of those who heard Bernie Houghton's tape-recorded speech in the fall of 1979 that made it clear that the real purpose of Nugent Hand was to provide banking services for the quote-unquote company or enterprise called the CIA. So Nugent Hand, which was created in the early 70s, around the same time BCCI was set up, as we know, because we've done extensive research on Nugent Hand being in Australia. Bernie Houghton, remember, was the guy that he owned the restaurant there, and he was kind of the ambassador, if you will, between the CIA and the local mafia that was in Australia. And the bank gets set up. The guy Nugent gets assassinated, shot in the head in his car. Hand, who was Army, was in Vietnam with all of these guys, goes on the run. He's dealing with the weapons side of all of this. They're money laundering all of the drug money in addition to BCCI. This book is one of the only books, which is why I wanted to bring it to you guys. It's one of the only books that actually puts the two of them together. Most of the books run side by side and they talk about the same people, but they don't overlay the two. This was the first book that I read that actually talks about, because you can't just money launder with one bank. You have to have front companies and multiple banks. We saw that in Paul Williams' book, where not only did you have the Vatican Bank, but you had the Bank of, what was the name of it? The downtown that Calvi was running for Italy. And then you had all of the 20-something front companies that had been set up by the Vatican, most of them in the Caribbean, but all international. And that's how they ended up with the money laundering operation. So you can't do it with just one bank. So it was quite obvious to me, if you go back and you look at when Nugent Hand was set up and when BCCI was set up, that they had to have been that arrangement. But again, I've read multiple books about BCCI. I've read multiple books about Nugent Hand, and they don't interact. So I want to say this again. Adam viewed Nugent Hand as a way for BCCI to fund its riskier operations. And they used Bernie Houghton to do this. Bernie Houghton made a speech in 1979, which was a few years, 7 years after they set this whole arrangement up, that made it clear that Nugent Hand was the CIA's bank. McDonald, identified as a former U.S. Department of Energy official, traveled the world for Nugent Hand. Now, that's very important because, of course, we know Department of Energy has the highest clearance of any department in the United States. So and I've made this point a lot recently, the CIA embedded him in the Department of Energy. He was always a CIA agent. Adams' involvement in Nugent Hand helps explain why the bank was allowed to operate so freely in Saudi Arabia, highly restrictive banking environment. The sudden appearance of Bernie Houghton in Saudi Arabia on behalf of Nugent Hand in late 1978, was indicative of their arrangement and the fact that it was sanctioned by the Saudi government. In January 1979, Houghton moved from Australia to Saudi Arabia to open a series of Nugent Hand banks. He visited various American-owned facilities and took at least $10 million in deposits from unsuspecting American workers who were paid in cash every 2 weeks. Although publicly, Nugent Hand said it was still expanding, actually, it was on the brink of failure. After the bank closed, despite Houghton's public role in taking American oil workers' money that would never be returned, nothing happened to him. It was highly unusual in a country where honest American businessmen had been thrown into jail for many, many years on much less charges. The Nugent Hand bankers, along with the money, simply vanished. One depositor showed up at the villa the bank had occupied, only to find it full of U.S. Air Force men who assured him that the bank's management had left to try to find out what was going on. The Saudi branch of Nugent Hand were treated very differently from any others. Mike Hand, the guy from Nugent Hand, told staffers that banking records in Saudi Arabia had been kept secret. According to a former manager in Australia who spoke on the condition of anonymity, quote, those records would have revealed that Nugent Hand had become nothing more than a shell operation for BCCI, unquote, which is what we thought the entire time. I just love the fact that this book gives us credible evidence that that's the case. Although Ed Wilson was never aware of it, his many deals on behalf of SAVAK, which is the Intelligence National Police in Iran, had been financed through Nugent Hand Bank, which tells you the CIA was running SAVAK for Iran. Wilson had no idea that his lawyer in Geneva, Ed Coughlin, who also represented Albert Hakim from time to time, had many dealings with Nugent Hand. Hakim had used Nugent Hand to finance many of his own deals in Iran. While the intelligence Shackley collected through Wilson for Israel had been first rate, Wilson's business dealings, especially his arms deals, was now making to the PLO, made him suspect to the Israelis. Other business ventures of Shackley's people with Iran and Libya also raised serious questions in Tel Aviv. Some officials believed that the joint intelligence operation was going to end in disaster. The Israelis had one American they trusted absolutely. Although James Angleton had been forced out of his job at the CIA, he was not about to allow his relationship with the Israeli intelligence hierarchy to be taken over by Shackley. Angleton was not a Shackley fan. Angleton was also one of the few men inside or outside the agency who still possessed the ability to penetrate Shackley and Klein's activities and find out what they were doing. While the Israelis and Saudis now relied on Shackley, who was doing liaison work with friendly intelligence services, the Israelis needed reassurance that he was on the up and up, especially Wilson, since they viewed him as the weak link. Angleton would be able to tell his Israeli associates if Shackley was playing it straight. Angleton had the perfect resource in mind. General, yes, as in military general, Robert Richardson, who ran a company called Exim, E-X-I-M, one of Wilson's companies supplying Libya. Angleton's courting of Wilson began in 1977 and continued right up until he was arrested in 1980. Wilson said General Richardson was a real close friend of Angleton's. About once a week, he would say, "Come on, Eddie, go to lunch with Angleton at the Army-Navy Club." When Wilson's name first surfaced in the investigations by the CIA IG and Office of Security, Angleton offered Wilson some advice. He suggested that Shackley was playing him for a fool, but Wilson ignored most of the warning. In retrospect, Wilson admits that when I first had this trouble, Angleton was really trying to help me. Angleton also warned Wilson that von Marbach was not his friend either. But again, Wilson didn't believe him. Quote, "I drifted off and he drifted off. Richardson stuck with me as long as he could. He really tried to help. Angleton was right. He was on the right track, but there was nothing too definitive. You couldn't say yes or no at that point. Von Marbach, who probably had more knowledge than anyone else about Iran's military ability to keep the Shah in power, successfully made the Ford-Carter transition. He was a savvy bureaucrat, and he had been a principal appointee of Gerald Ford. But just before Ford's defeat, von Marbach converted his political appointee status to civil service. Wilson said it was remarkable to watch how he did it. Quote, "Everybody said if Carter gets in, we're going to get this guy. We're going to get him and get him fired because he couldn't be a civil service employee. When Carter came in, they found out 3 months before that he had been converted to a GS-18 and went back to an old job. And all these enemies that had tried to get him were just shot down all over the place. He's the smartest guy in there. I don't give a damn. He's the smartest man combined with toughness and smarts that I've ever known. The guy goes up against anybody that goes up against him has a problem. Behind it all, he's the mastermind of the whole thing," unquote. Wilson witnessed von Marbach manipulating Richard Secord, while Secord ran the Air Force Military Assistance Program in Iran. Quote, "Von Marbach sent Secord over there as a full colonel. And then they got him his star and made him a general. Secord kind of got the big head over there. When I was over there visiting him, I said to von Marbach, quote, 'Is Secord going to get a second star?' Unquote. Von Marbach said, 'He's getting a big head. I'm going to make him wait for a while.' He didn't get it for about a year. Von Marbach controlled the whole thing. An example of just how cunning he was the approving billions in sales to Iran under previous administrations, to include Carter. He succeeded in persuading the Carter administration to send him over to make certain the equipment got paid for. He wanted to get under the civil service your highest 3-year salary. So he wanted to get like a level 1 retirement. So he made himself a defense attaché, And Ambassador Richard Helms, who of course is CIA, was really upset because von Marbach was on the same level as the ambassador. I mean, Helms was furious, but von Marbach worked around it, and they ended up becoming very good friends, Wilson said. So he kind of just maneuvered around everybody. And again, von Marbach, Marbod, is somebody in most books that we've read never even comes up. He never gets mentioned. And he's one of the most important people during this time. It's quite amazing. As a matter of fact, I had his name written down, but I didn't have any information about him until I picked up this book. And he's at the heart of a whole bunch of the Iran-Iraq War, Ed Wilson, Task Force 157. I mean, he's floating around all of these things, BCCI, Nugent Hand, and kind of like literally a ghost, just hovering around everywhere. So we're just going to do one chapter today. The next chapter starts the actual takeover from Ed Wilson, and it gets really good at that point. So there's those two chapters I want to do together because 19 and 20 actually closely go together. So I don't want to break them up. We're going to go through both of those tomorrow. So we will open it up for question, comments, all of the above.
That von Marbach seems to be a continuing thread through like every nefarious operation.
Yeah, and the thing that I found the most interesting is up until this book, I think I only found his name in one other book, and then there was very little written about him. So
it's crazy.
Which is why I keep buying books.
Which is why we might have to add on to that.
We're not adding on to it. I'm going to have to prioritize. That's all I can say. But I'm just going to move the other one on the other wall. So I'll still have that. It's just not going to be the premier one that you see when you walk in the door. Yours will be.
Oh.
So anyway, I still have the other two in there. They're just going to have the little low rent books in them.
At least they won't be overwhelmed.
None of them will be overwhelmed.
I can't believe how beautiful that came out. She had sent me some photos the other night. That's going to be so cool. And the fact that it sits together like Legos, I mean, that is just really sweet. I'm blown away by it. I agree with you, Cousin It. Number one. So I have to tell you, because this is at that same level. I don't know if I've ever even told this story, but when I first met John, my husband, I had been retired for a few years. I was raising my daughters. They were in, one had just started high school. One had just started junior high. I was not interested in dating anyone. The first time I had not had a job, I had just been medically retired. I had a lot of medical issues I was dealing with. So I just wasn't interested in dating anybody. And there were two guys. Obviously, I love football. I have a lot of, I love cars. I'm a mechanic. That's kind of what I do. And so one guy that I had graduated high school with was renovating his Firebird. Another guy that I had known my whole life, they were also single. And so we kind of just palled around. If I wanted to go to dinner and I didn't want to go by myself, I would just call them up and we kind of just become pals. So that's how I actually met John, was through hanging around with those two. Our whole high school had every third Thursday a get together at a local restaurant. And so they told me about it. I went to a couple of them. And the first one I went to, John sat down next to me. So he became part of our threesome, which is now 4 of us, because he had just recently got a divorce. So again, just palling around. So I had them all over on a Saturday for a cookout. And I was telling them, in my backyard, I have a pool house, and it was about 30 feet from my house. And I wanted something, because there was a half bath in there. I wanted it to be the pool house so you could just hang around out there. I wanted an outdoor kitchen. And I was describing to them, not knowing that John was an electrical contractor. I mean, I knew he was, but I didn't know the extent to which he was an actual contractor, like building shit. And so in mentioning it, he looks around at me and he goes, well, why don't you just build a deck? And I'm looking at him going, because I can't. I have a bad back. So, I mean, I can't just like make that happen. I can't lift things like that. He goes, well, I'll help you. And I just looked at him like, are you on drugs? What's wrong with you? You need to have a life. You don't just go around offering people to build decks. And so, of course, he builds the biggest, most wonderful deck. It's like 1,000 square foot. It's now all under screen. It's got an outdoor kitchen. It's 2-tiered, blah, blah, blah. So that's the whole thing with Bridget. What Bridget did to me, for me, reminded me of exactly that the way it unfolded, where, Cousin It and her and I were on a conversation, and I'm showing them the interior of the shed after we got it completely transformed into the cottage. And I'm kind of pointing everything out to him, and Bridget's like, what the hell's wrong with that bookcase? Because it's like sagging in the middle. And she's like, you need a new bookcase. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And like I said, a couple of days later, I get these pictures. Which one do you want? And I'm like, she's on drugs. She's on drugs. You're not just going to build somebody a bookcase. How are you going to get it here? I'll just ship it. I'm like, okay, build me a bookcase. I want that one. And she built the bookcase. So yeah, it is truly amazing to have people like that in your life that are talented and will go out of their way to do extraordinary things. And what Bridget did was extraordinary, as far as I'm concerned. So.
Well, I only build stuff for people I love. There's an cutting board that is very unique as well.
That cutting board.
Oh my God. I love my cutting board. Holy smokes. Every day, multiple times a day.
Yeah. So you should post a picture of that, Cousin Ed, if you can. That it is an amazing cutting board. And again, the fact that, because Bridget, correct me if I'm wrong, you put multiple pieces of different types of wood together. Is that correct?
Yes, it's actually kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. You take a picture, or take a piece of wood, cut it, turn it, cut it, turn it, join it, cut it, turn it, join it, until it's all the right way. It's fun.
It's fun in a really sick kind of way.
Yeah, in a sort of OCD sort of, I love it.
Yeah. And by the way, probably the coolest thing about it, Cousin It, is that it goes in your travel. It's like in an RV. So it, where space matters so much, Bridget actually had her do a template and built it to custom fit her sink. So most of us, like I have a continuation of my granite pieces that you can put over your sink. And then, if you want just to have a bigger countertop, like if you're putting things out for dinner, but then you can pull them off. And so Bridget used that template to make this so it specifically sits and fits into her sink. Is that right, Cousin It? Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. So.
Correct. And I did actually.
It actually sharpens her knife instead of dulling her knife as she uses it.
That's just crazy. And so the kind of, and again, I'm just going by memory. Is it like the things that keeps it in place, like little legs, so you can actually put it on the counter as well, and it's kind of raised up?
Yeah, correct. She made the shape of the sink thicker, so it sits in the sink. And there's, I'll take a photo of the back of it. Well, you guys are like so demanding. Hang on.
She shows up and we're just bombarding her.
Yes, and see, it's just beautiful. I mean, I'm looking at the picture she just posted. Holy crap. So again, Bridget is amazing. In addition to being part of our research team, she's a carpenter, a hunter, an excellent marksman. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if I can be Bridget's apprentice. She doesn't have to pay me. Okay, so I have a question back on the banking stuff, which I find very difficult. So they've invaded Syria again. If you had to like analyze and figure out where they pulled the money, how they got that money, what would you say? Is it like they diverted funds from Ukraine? What bank in your mind is at play here?
Well,
now?
so TD Bank. So first of all, they've never left Syria. These are the same people that have been in Syria. The things that they call quote unquote rebels aren't rebels. They are people that they have picked up from other Mujahideen, ISIS, Al Qaeda, blah, 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 terrorist training camps under Operation Gladio auspices and trucked them into Syria. That's the quote unquote rebels. If you go back and you look at some of the pictures that people have actually labeled, they're from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Chechnya. So these are not people, these are not Syrians attacking Assad. These are CIA Operation Gladio operatives that are trying to do a regime change and cannot get it done. So that's point number one. Point number two is, and we're going to go through a lot of this on Wednesday on Breaking History with part 2 of Syria. We're going to go from where we left off to current day. But the second part of that, as far as the banking goes, we just saw, if you go back and you read the indictments of the TD Bank, where they were fined $2 billion, you're going to see that they were money laundering using real banks now. This isn't even the old CIA, we're going to create Nugent Hand out of whole cloth as a fake bank, or Castle Bank, or BCCI. They actually have transitioned much of their drug money laundering operations into regular banks. So I just ask you to go do this one very generic exercise. Look on the SEC website for money laundering convictions or plea deals. You are going to find case after case after case all around the world. Credit Suisse, the Deutsche Bank, HSBC, every single one of those major banks are money laundering. They're money laundering today, just like they were money laundering 10 years ago. They have a ready supply, and not just drug money. Keep in mind, all of the gold from Golden Lily that we've talked about, those are still slushing around in these banks under accounts that were, you can't say they were abandoned. They were never allowed to redeem to take their gold out. So remember the Roxas guy that his heirs went to try to get his gold out of the New York branch of Citibank, and Citibank that night transferred it all down to their branch in the Bahamas. They never gave the family members their gold back. And that wasn't even the government's piece of it. That was a commission that he got for setting up all of those. So it was just like pennies on the dollar, but those pennies were hundreds of billions of dollars. So there's a lot of money out there for them to have been doing this with. And to your point about Ukraine overall is a money laundering operation. The money that goes over there is not necessarily used for the purpose in which it's intended. We all know that. The weapons that were shipped over there, you would be lucky, as we found in Afghanistan, what they were doing. So the US would authorize, and I'm just going to pick a number, $100 million for weapons. During the first Afghanistan war, that we were basically supplying them covertly through Pakistan into Afghanistan. So if it's $100 million the CIA gives to Pakistani ISI, supposedly to supply weapons to Afghanistan, that's not what happened with that money. They actually took, again, pennies on the dollar, let's say $100,000, and they went to Bulgaria and they bought old Soviet bullshit stuff that barely even worked. They shipped that into Afghanistan as the quote unquote weapons. And then they took all of the rest of the money and money laundered it through their banking systems called BCCI and Nugent Hand, and then used them again for covert terrorist operations. So they have a multitude of ways that they do this, but you know that every dollar that comes out of America through USAID or the State Department, National Endowment for Democracy, the IRI and the Democrat version of that, all of that money is laundered into these operations. Cousin Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been following it actually, and a lot of those weapons that they have are coming in from Ukraine. And it's no secret that Netanyahu stood up in front of everybody and told people, he gave the dog whistle, essentially. He stood up in front of whoever, in front of a camera, and said, Bashar Assad has to leave. He has to get out. And all of a sudden, these terrorists were activated. At the end of the day, it's Israel, Turkey, and Israel, Turkey, and the United States trying to get rid of Assad. And Russia has called out Erdogan. Point blank has called out Erdogan. They know he's involved. So as much as everyone says, oh, you know, they're from everywhere else, no, they are actually coming out of Turkey. And those ISIS rebels have just been rebranded. A while back, if you recall, we were talking about how people just changed their patches. That's them. And at one point, oh God, was it last year? They were talking about recruiting the ISIS into the Ukrainian forces. Do you remember that?
Not directly. I do remember them talking about using ISIS there, but not actually in the military, more like they are doing the right sector in the Azov battalion before they were actually added to the regular forces.
Yeah, they had the patches and everything else, and that got us down that rabbit hole
Yes.
for like a week.
So
Following all those
talking about patches, again, when you go back and you look at pictures of the militant, quote unquote, rebels in Syria, at the beginning of this several years ago, they actually are wearing Ukrainian patches. This is not a recent thing. They actually have the triad pitchfork looking thing on their patches, on their uniforms, in many pictures that are several years old. So yeah, this is definitely not a new thing. They come from all over. They are definitely Operation Gladio. They are definitely doing regime change in Syria. They've been doing it for a very long time. Because keep in mind, they've been trying to get the quote unquote Assad regime out since it was Assad's father. This is not a new thing because they need Syria to finish their pipeline. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I just need to think about that they don't have one bank anymore. They've normalized money laundering throughout the entire banking sector.
That's true.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that.
And I think that, let me just add, I think that goes along the lines with the Promise software, because the Promise software that Robert Maxwell was selling on behalf of Israel, that their corrupted version, and the one that was being sold by the CIA into many of these countries, allowed for money laundering operations to be exposed when other people were doing it. But it also allowed, because of the programming that they did backdoor, for them to hide their own money laundering. So that allowed it to move mainstream as opposed to having to set up their own bank.
And do you think that one of the goals was to fuck the dollar in the end, like as the globalists? Because in my mind, if you're corrupting your banking sector, then you're going to fuck that currency.
Well, at some point, their intent is to bring down America, but their real intent is basically to rob all of us collectively of our wealth, right? Once they have all of the wealth and the power, we're basically debt slaves at that point. So they've used the dollar manipulation to their advantage, which I believe is the reason why the entire apparatus was eventually, everyone was basically forced, because of our pariah activity, to use the dollar. So when you force the world structure with the manipulation of the oil petrodollar to move on to the dollar, you have to be able to control the dollar, which they have done. So whenever they want inflation, we have inflation. Whenever they don't want inflation, we don't have inflation. And it is through the control of the dollar that they've been able to. So if you go back to all of the Latin American coups that we talked about, that was all done with predatory control of their markets. They would shut the entire country down. They shut them off from any kind of economic viability. It was literally like stringing someone up and then quartering them and waiting for them to cry uncle, because they're going to eventually cry uncle, because their people are starving. The people will get out in the streets and overthrow the government, even if what's they're overthrowing their government for is going to be worse for them, because they don't want to starve. And that's what they banked on. That's the whole impetus for Operation Gladio, is this coercive control. And so let me also point out something that this information that we're learning gives you an ability to look at not just what we focus on, which is Gladio, obviously, and the paramilitary takeover of the world, but it gives you information that allows you to have conversations with people, which, Carrie, is the point of your whole question. That's not something that we actually talk about per se, but allows you enough information to be able to have these conversations. And let me point out what I'm trying to say. When I was at GART recently, there was a guy, there was a guy, I mentioned him before, that was talking about Bitcoin. And he made the comment that El Salvador uses Bitcoin as currency. Well, they don't actually use it as currency. It's approved for currency, but they use the dollar. And the only way I knew that, to know that he was full of crap on that conversation, was because of the research that I had done into Gladio and how they blackmail these countries because they use the dollar. And it is through this research that I figured out all about the remittance. So the remittance is huge. And as a matter of fact, it came up in a conversation today on the news. I just happened to be walking through the room. My husband, as I told you guys many times, either has Fox Business or CNBC because he does a little bit of day trading. And so they were talking about the tens of billions of dollars that are sent back to Mexico and to Canada in remittance. And I had never actually talked about Canada, but it's a shit ton of money. And as a result of that, you have they don't want to shut down immigration if they don't have to, because they're making bank on it. So the money goes into their banks, like say Mexico. There's a lag between the time that they make that money available to the end user and when they get it. And sometimes that lag can be 5 days. So on any given day, they're showing on books in banks in Mexico tens of billions of dollars of assets, which is that remittance lag. And that's how BCCI lived for 20 years, because there were tens of thousands of Pakistanis in Qatar and UAE and Saudi Arabia where they opened BCCI branches, and all of the money going back to Pakistan, because it was a Pakistani bank on paper. It really wasn't. We've already discovered that it was basically operated out of the city of London. But that was a billions and billions of dollars that they were able to use for nefarious weapons deals and all this other stuff, because it's showing on their books as an asset. And as a result of that, we collectively are much smarter about the way our world operates by doing the research that we have done into Operation Gladio. Miles, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Colonel. Yeah, you bring up a good subject as far as conversations with people to see what level they're at this point. When I started doing this a long time ago, I was just spewing out a lot of information, hoping that it would absorb in through osmosis. And now I've got a different strategy. So when I'm doing spaces, I'll bring up I'll ask a question for the audience or the panel members to see where they're at, what level. So the other day I just brought up, when I say military industrial complex, is that a positive or a negative for you? And everyone said negative. I went, okay, so do you know who said that? And they went, oh yeah, that was Eisenhower. Well, was he a good guy or a bad guy? So everyone was saying, oh, well, he's a good guy. So you see where I'm going with this. I'm testing people in the classroom to see where they're at this point. And then I said, okay, so is Space Force good? And is Elon good? Well, yeah. I said, well, that's the military industrial complex that Eisenhower was talking about. Warning who? Who was he warning? Not us. It was a threat to their democracy, to their plan that they had through political stuff that they were doing. So I know a lot of people, they don't look like in a mirror effect, like how they're trying to, run a psyop on us. But I think people are starting to get it, because if you look at, why was Space Force started by Trump? Is Trump on the financial side, the industrial side is Elon. So, throughout history, these tyrants are afraid that, the military is always going to get behind the people, and and the companies that make money, that they'll align themselves with the military too. So I just wanted to point that out. But we have to have these conversations. And I'm not saying that I'm always right or anything, but people are, I think they're starting to get it, Colonel.
I hope so. Cousin Nick, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, Pakistan. Interesting little side note with Pakistan. So the hotel that's in New York that I cannot remember the name of, that they own.
Yeah.
So apparently that was closed down because they were losing money.
Well,
So
go ahead and explain to everybody what you're talking about, because a lot of people might not be following that.
Oh, so the hotel that all the illegal aliens are staying at in New York City is actually owned by Pakistan. And the hotel apparently, which I didn't know, was shut down, really, because they were essentially bankrupt. So speaking of money laundering to foreign countries, aren't they getting millions of dollars to harbor all the illegal aliens in that hotel? What is it called? I can't remember the hotel name. Isn't that awful? But anyway, that's how money laundering works. That hotel was closing. They could not afford to keep it. They were losing revenue. And then all of a sudden they've got millions and millions of dollars coming in because they're harboring illegals. So
the Roosevelt Hotel, cousin Ed.
Thank you. Gosh, brain fart. I hate this getting old stuff. It's just for the birds.
So I thought the irony of the whole story was the fact that it was called the Roosevelt.
I know, I was thinking of that, Colonel. I started laughing.
Right? Cousin It? Because isn't that where we started this whole damn thing, was back when we were doing Anthony Sutton and FDR, and we all found out that what we thought about him was all a big lie. And then I'm like, so we've spent, 2 years doing this bullshit, and we're right back to Roosevelt money laundering.
I know, it's crazy. And but here's the thing, and this is where it gets so frustrating, right? And this is where, awakening people conversation. All these presidents in the past were always portrayed as being the good guys. So far, we haven't come across one good guy, not one. I think even Carter had a chance. He really did. And then he got bought and paid for as well. And they had to get rid of him because he was another one that didn't want any wars. JFK, even him, he got in there on dirty money. The mafia put him in there. They weren't expecting his brother Robert. So I think, this idolizing these presidents as being so pure and good and the best of intentions, they may walk in there with the best of intentions, but at the end of the day, they're corrupted. Which brings me to the next point. I don't care who the hell Trump is, all right? Now, I voted for him. I absolutely will admit that. If you don't question every single appointment, every last stinking one of them, then we're going to be in the same fucking position in another 4 years. It is your responsibility. It is our responsibility to question everything. Because we're sitting here right now in this predicament because we were all lazy and complacent. And we have the voices now. So if that corrupt sheriff in Hillsborough County, right, who arrested a pastor under DeSantis's nose, and DeSantis allowed it to happen, right? He's another bullshit artist. Call it out. Absolutely call it out. We don't have to like all of his choices. I don't know about the rest of you. The following like a sheep thing is all done. I am done. Stick a fork in me. I'm done. And the first one that starts shilling for another country like they all are doing, by the way, very concerning for me. I'm going to call it out. It's your responsibility. It's my responsibility. enough being, like, oh, he knows, trust the plan, yada, yada. We are the plan, people. We're the plan. So anyway, that's my big soapbox, and I'll step down.
So I'll follow up. Obviously, I'm the one out there posting all the bullshit, because that sheriff that she's talking about is a sheriff next to Polk County. So Hillsborough County is right next to Polk County. And of course, y'all all know that we have one of the best sheriffs there is. Not perfect, one of the best, Grady Judd. The difference between, and we're sandwiched in between of Hillsborough County and Orange County is even worse than Hillsborough County. So the distinction between where we're at in the state of Florida, in Central Florida, stands out significantly. I actually went to the movie screening for Chris Ann Hall's second movie. Her first movie was called Non-Compliant. And her second movie was Non-Compliance, the Sheriff. And her movie actually features the pastor, Rodney Howard Brown, of the River Church. Now, you guys may have heard when we first started this whole thing, the last 2 years up until this semester, a friend of mine from Minnesota's daughter has been living with us, and she goes to the college that's at the river, the church there. They have their own Christian college there. So I'm very familiar with the church, the pastor, and I've met Chris Ann Hall at the movie premiere, and I've met the pastor involved in that. So you can damn well bet that I'm going to be one of the most vocal people that sheriff is a piece of shit. To the extent that what he was doing has anything to do with and I get Cousin It's point as far as denouncing it, but we in Florida, we elect our sheriff. So it wasn't like you can fire the sheriff as a governor. So I don't know exactly what authority the governor had other than speaking out against it to be able to hold that guy accountable. But to me, the most egregious part of that whole thing he was actually at the same time letting people out of jail that were like felony people in order under the quote unquote COVID, and while at the same time arresting people like the pastor. And for those of you who don't know, the River Church has taken on a mission of feeding people that had no ability, especially during COVID, with everybody getting laid off. The families had no money, no food. They constructed this temporary, they've made it permanent now. It's amazing, actually. This huge outdoor church. And what most people don't realize is kind of a funny story of the location that they're on. It used to be a big auto sales place. And I mean, it's massive. It was probably one of the biggest ones in the state of Florida, like one of those CarMax things. It then turned into an actual drive-in church because the car lot was so freaking big. They didn't really have outbuildings or buildings at all. They just had what they had as the showroom there. But it had this mammoth parking lot. So they actually had this big screen, and it was a drive-in church for many, many years. So the river bought the land and set up this beautiful church. So he constructed this temporary thing outside in order to have people safely come and pick up their food, because his big thing was he had to feed the people. And they have now been running that outside church 24/7 since COVID. It never shuts down. And they have a ministry that
is just an amazing thing to see. If you ever have a chance to go over there and check it out. They have just been growing by leaps and bounds. Chris Ann Hall actually goes to church there. She has, she's now on the staff of the college. She does her constitutional classes as part of the college curriculum. It's an amazing place. And this asshole who's going to be the DEA, and, you know, I've heard the stories about, you know, Trump appointing him, get him to quit so they can elect a constitutional sheriff there. I've heard all of those theories. But at the end of the day, Cousin It is absolutely right. We're no better than the people that we complain about if you don't call out bad choices. Now, we know from our study in Operation Gladio how complicit the DEA is in the drug trafficking, because we have illustrated in many of our book reviews early on that the old what was it called, B&DD, the something, I can't remember the precursor to the DEA, but those people that were involved in the precursor were part of the CIA drug trafficking operations. At every step where there were arrests being made at the lower level, you were only allowed to investigate so high. And then the apparatus that had to do with the DEA eventually, but the precursor as well, would shut down the investigation because they were complicit with the CIA. They'd get a phone call, no whistleblowers. Nobody ever said, you know, hey, this is bullshit. We're only arresting the lower guys. Because remember, that's what happened with the BCCI money laundering case and drug trafficking. No drug trafficking was ever investigated in conjunction with the BCCI bank in Tampa taking that plea deal, and a few of the underling guys in the money laundering operation getting some jail time, none of which was more than 12 months, by the way. Oh, and by the way, that was in Tampa, which is Hillsborough County. So all of this shit, Santo Trafficani, is Hillsborough County. This is where the heart of the drug mafia resided in Florida, not in Miami. He went down there all the time. It was in Tampa, in Hillsborough County. So the entire fucking DEA thing is screwed up. And then we're going to make the guy who's now the sheriff there, and I know Trafficani's not there anymore, but it's still a hub of drug trafficking because it's a port city. You're going to make that guy the DEA. It has to be called out. Cousin It's absolutely right. So what else we got? Anybody?
Miles, come on.
Colonel Alfred's been trying to come up. I've offered him the mic several times and it's not taken.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw that. Maybe glitching.
Maybe.
At
Yeah.
least we still have the host.
Yeah, because that's been a problem.
They might have to drop out and come back in again.
Maybe. All right, he's back up here. Alfred, if you can talk, go ahead and just start talking.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I think this application is really glitchy. When I came on today, everyone was banding, a lot of digital distortion. So I had to, reconnect a bunch of times, and it just seems really kind of crappy software. Anyway, so just wanted to talk about or ask your opinion. The thing going on with Israel and Gaza. Israel carpet bombing residential neighborhoods. I think the death count's 300,000 or more at this point. And I'm going to admit, I'm like, I like everything General Flynn says, except when he calls Israel our greatest ally. For some reason, that just really triggers me. I don't see where war criminals on the level that the leadership in Israel in my opinion, should ever be considered an ally to any real country. And I'm just wondering what you think about that.
So I'm not going to talk about General Flynn. I can tell you, I have said repeatedly that someone needs to define ally to me. I view an ally as someone who has your best interest at heart, and you share common, in the case of a nation state to nation state, that you share general goals and cultures and aspirations for your people. So that to me would make you an ally, that someone, kind of like your friends, you call someone an acquaintance, and then you have somebody that's a friend. An acquaintance is not a friend. I can have an acquaintance, I can do business with an acquaintance, but I'm not going to trust them to watch my children, right? You do that with a friend. So to me, that's the difference between a business partner in a nation state to nation state and an ally. An ally is someone that you would trust your friends with, or the well-being of your citizens. So I do not view Israel as an ally of the United States. And I'm not even going to talk about their horrific treatment or what's going on there currently. I have thought this since I did any research in my master's degree in school at Air War College. I did a paper about the Entebbe raid. In doing the research for that paper, and I had never heard this, I've never heard it reported at the time. Now we talk about it quite a lot, but I did not realize how often Israel has been caught spying on the United States. To me, if you're an ally of the United States, why would you be spying on the United States? That would be like me saying that my neighbor's my best friend and I've got cameras all pointed at their house and I'm reporting on them to the cops every time they do something wrong. That's not a friend.
Right.
That's not even an acquaintance.
That's an enemy.
That's an enemy. So and again, I try to stay on the military aspect, the paramilitary as it relates to Gladio operations. So if you want to set aside that, you then, as part of our Operation Gladio investigation, we found out about the thing called the Mega Group, MEGA. It was talked about in Whitney Webb's book that we did a book review on. You could go watch the Rumble book reviews we did, because they're actually amazing. Using her research and declassified CIA documents that we came across independently of her research, but she talks about them as well. They're referenced in her book, that this thing called MEGA. And when the CIA documents first got released, accidentally, by the way, in a different FOIA request, people thought MEGA was a person, and that was their call sign. That was their code name. Come to find out, MEGA was actually referring to an entity called Mega Group, which was made up of a whole bunch of dual citizens, Israeli background affiliates in the United States, to include Wexner, who, of course, we know was the impetus for Jeffrey Epstein. And that the Mega Group funders donated like 99% of the quote unquote renovation dollars to the White House when Clinton took office. So you now have a pattern of Jeffrey Epstein renovating property in his Southern Florida house, in his Arizona house, in his New York house, and his renovations have spying equipment associated with it. So he started his visits, the 17 visits to the White House, as part of this renovation that his benefactors, to include Les Wexner, was funding. So this group of Jewish billionaires funded the renovation for the White House. And in this declassified CIA document, it actually talks about them, that the White House was being spied upon. And that Linda Tripp's conversation initially talking about the Monica Lewinsky affair was because she knew about the potential for blackmail. And that's the reason why she ever even spoke up, because she felt like Bill Clinton was being blackmailed because he was being spied upon in the Oval Office, which in fact he was, from this mega group.
Sure.
And so again, this is not something that you do. So basically, Israel owned Bill Clinton most of the time that he was president. So there's only one reason why you blackmail someone. And at the same time, there were several companies that were giving critical software and military capability to China that were part of these mega group bundle of companies. So you can surmise that potentially, and oh, by the way, they got a slap on the wrist from the Justice Department during Clinton when they were eventually caught selling things that they were not authorized to sell to China. It was also China that Israel has done nuclear research with, along with France. We know that France provided all of the 1960 technology to Israel via South Africa, and that Israel used South Africa to test their nuclear capability. We found all of that out when we were doing the research for the USS Liberty, and the false flags associated with that. So all of those things tells me militarily that Israel is not an ally. But let me just say this, because I believe this is pertinent to what's about ready to happen. You cannot, in America, with the level of ignorance, and let me just clarify that, because I don't want anybody to think I'm insulting people.
I know what you're going to say.
Okay, but I have to say it.
Please.
When you don't have information, you're ignorant. When you have information and you either pretend that you don't understand it or you don't understand the information, you're stupid. And you keep repeating the same behavior, despite the fact that you now know. That's referred to as being stupid. So there is so much ignorance as it relates to Israel and our relationship because of people like Frank Luntz. Frank Luntz was the guy that wrote the PR plan to sell us the Iraq War the first time. We have been propagandized in the United States and our wealth stolen, not just by Israel, but by many countries through the CIA and their post-World War II intelligence apparatuses, to include the UK, by the way, who is responsible for the creation of Israel as a nation state. So there is such a big piece here of ignorance in the United States that you cannot come to be president or anything else if it is done attacking Israel or identifying them as anything other than an ally as it stands today. Now, do I hope that over the next 4 years, that with the declassification and the re-education of the populace of the United States, that we, for once, with all of the declassification that has to happen, that we are going to learn what our real history is? Yes, I pray for that every single night. That's why I am dedicating the time that I am to that re-education process. But we are planting seeds of which I hope get watered a lot over the next 4 years, so that
this all can be exposed.
So it really strikes me that a lot of the ignorance is due to the misinformation being spread by mainstream media.
Well, that's the
really see
CIA.
Yeah, I see it as a pivotal point of why there's just so many people.
Well,
I don't want to say, I don't want to call them names or anything, but it's hard not to at this point. Like when you got a country carpet bombing residential neighborhoods.
well,
how can you think they're heroes?
But
They're so good.
but the whole thing is, this is an operation. It was an operation that was started in 1948, and there is no mainstream media. That in and of itself is a propaganda talking point. There is no such thing as the mainstream media. The CIA owns and operates those entities. Yes,
So that's totally illegal. They're not allowed to
they weren't allowed to buy all the LSD and give it to the people in San Francisco either, but they did.
Yeah, they did.
So they're not allowed to infiltrate our university systems, and they're 100%. They're not allowed to infiltrate the international companies in the United States and pretend to be staff, but they have. They weren't allowed to train Cuban exiles in a camp in Miami, but they did.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, they've operated above the law. They get away with whatever they can get away with, and they get away with whatever the fuck they want.
So my whole thing, Alfred, honestly, my whole thing is, I want to clean up our shit, then we can go take care of everybody else's shit. I understand that what Israel is doing is awful. It is absolutely awful. The CIA and all of the intel agencies, to include Mossad and MI6 and the German BND and the Korean KCIA, has killed literally millions of people all over the world. I want our shit cleaned up, and then we'll go hold everybody else accountable.
So what is this with these PR teams obviously being embedded into mainstream media in this country? Like, they pretend they hide behind national security when it suits them, and then they hide behind the public free speech bullshit.
Correct.
When it suits them. How do you get these fuckers out?
Well, I think that's the beauty of the team that Trump is assembling, is Ratcliffe at the CIA and Gabbard at the national security apparatus. You've got the DNI. That's how you do it. And the number one step in doing that was to get Twitter. So if you've got Twitter, huh?
Yeah, that was huge. I agree.
Right. So if you've got Twitter, all you need is one, but it had to be a big one, right? It couldn't just be True Social. It had to be a big one. And so now you've got Rumble, you have True Social, and you have Twitter. And through those mechanisms, the word gets out in less than 24 hours now. And when Elon Musk does now say that we are the news, we are 100% the news now. And within 24 hours, so just your point. Okay, so we know all of the crap about what's happening in Israel and what's happening in Syria, and the fact, as Cousin It pointed out earlier, what's happening and the role that Turkey's playing. How do we know all of that? We know all of that because we have access to the information now. That has broken the dam. And so now we just need the people in the DOJ, the CIA, and the FBI, which we're going to have in January, and then the flood begins.
I hope so. Thank you so much. Colonel.
Sure. Cousin It, go ahead.
Sorry, I was shooting at squirrels. You missed the punchline about Monica Lewinsky. She was a Ukrainian Jew. So there's that. And, tell me that she wasn't set up in the Clinton White House, knowing that the surveillance was going on there. As a matter of fact, if you look at most of the Israeli leaders, they're all from Poland or Ukraine. They're not Israelis, or like in the sense of being born in that country. They're all from outside that country, all of them. So, you know, you can't tell me that the Nazis, who all were hired by Israel, haven't infiltrated. It is a Rothschild's state. It is not a state in the sense that should be like self-governing. They've abused that privilege. It was always a lie. And they've always tried to infiltrate here. So as the colonel said, they are not allies. As a matter of fact, thank you, Bridget. John F. Kennedy Jr. was on a late night show, and I'm sure, Bridget, you're much better. I'm outside aiming at squirrels. That actually, Monica Lewinsky wrote a poem when she was like 9th grade or something like that, talking about child abuse, talking about eating pizzas and what have you. But we know that the code word for the child abuse and child trafficking is pizzas. So she was part of all of that. And at some point, if we get to the bottom of Epstein and the child trafficking, half of DC is going to be gone. If
I
they
agree.
if they release the Diddy files and the Epstein files, if Trump has the balls, right, because he didn't have the balls to go against Barr and pardon Assange or Snowden, right? So we'll see if he actually releases the list, because people are going to be packing their shit. As a matter of fact, speaking of packing their shit, where's Fauci? Anybody? Where's Big Mike and Obama?
Okay, SR71, go.
To Alfred's point concerning the MSM and your point about ignorance, I guess what you have to understand here in the U.S., there has been a, shall I say, a curtain put up around the U.S. for years when it comes to news matters and that kind of thing that happens. It's rare that you find anybody that will post news articles from other news sources other than American news sources, which I know Cousin Ed, Bridget, myself do, to bring to Twitter to say, here's what's really going on. Here's what people are really seeing on the ground. We weren't getting that before. And people are not getting it now because they are so trained at looking at the MSM versus trying to find out what's really going on. Thanks to X and everything else and the platforms that we have now that people have glommed onto, and I mean really glommed onto, it makes a huge difference. They're seeing the truth. Whether or not they act on it is the question. And that's what we're aiming to have happen. Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. Miles, go ahead.
Well, can I just interject 1 second? X isn't infallible, because I have tried a number of times to post Russian newspapers, like legitimate Russian newspapers, Pravda and RU and what have you, and those are blocked. So there's a lot of tweaking that needs to be done. And there's nothing more annoying to me than having to go to Truth Social, be able to post it, and then come back here and say, sorry, guys, you got to go over there to actually read the article, because X still won't acknowledge legitimate Russian news. So not infallible yet, guys.
No, it definitely is not infallible. It is definitely much better than it was. I agree. Miles, go ahead.
So, Alfred, what we focus on in here is the international syndicate. They know no boundaries, no borders, and they show no alliance to any flag. So we don't really get into the minutia of like certain situations and say, oh, you're bad, stuff like that. So if you want to know who the international syndicate is, there was an event in 1967, the USS Liberty. And anybody that was part of that is part of the syndicate. So basically what we're up against, it's we the people against the international syndicate. It's not other countries. So, thanks, Colonel.
Sure. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to push back a little bit against communicating with each other, like on platforms and verbally, as like the only path, because I've studied a lot of Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, and there really is a collective unconscious, which means what you personally do, like everything you say, everything you think, everything you feel matters. Like every speck of it matters. So, Colonel, you getting off your ass and reading all this stuff, and all of you that research that, we would, how can we communicate about anything if you didn't do that in the first place? You raised your consciousness level. And
So who said that it was the only path? I don't remember anybody saying that.
well, I'm not saying that they did say that.
Okay.
I'm just saying it seems like people are maybe communicating that, oh my God, what do we do if we can't communicate? Well, we have actual mechanisms. I mean, I can go through medically that do communicate with other people, like without without an outside thing. Anyway, that's very deep stuff. But anyway, also I wanted to talk about that. There's the Seven Sisters documentary that Seven Sisters is a big oil documentary that I posted a link to in the pill. And there's this really cool guy, I think he's from like Libya or something. And he says, America has no allies, only interests, which is so fucking sad. But it really changed my mind about thinking about allies and stuff. And the whole thing about like the infiltration of Christianity by the Old Testament and ignoring the New Testament is a really, really long old psyop. And people really forget that the Romans assassinated Jesus, because the Jews, put him on trial, called against him. And I don't know why people ignore that, but they do. Anyway, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to get to the Seven Sisters. That is highlighted a lot in the book that I have called Follow the Pipelines. And it's a very interesting subset of all of what has transpired, because I'm still, you guys, this book that I'm reading called I Will Be Done from Nelson Rockefeller is like kicking my butt. It is like a 1,000-page book. I'm halfway through it though. And I'm going to do some kind of generic information about that, because everything in the book's mind-blowing. But because of most of what the Rockefellers did had to do with Standard Oil, obviously, and it was all over the world, the two books kind of go hand in hand with each other. So that's kind of going to be a next big project, is putting that whole piece of things together. And of course, I have said repeatedly on the Nelson Rockefeller side of things, it was kind of my first foray into, so we exposed, obviously, at the very beginning, the Catholic Church and their money laundering for the Paul Helliwell, Chiang Kai-shek drug initially. And that's kind of how we started this whole thing with Paul Williams' book. But you know, we obviously have gotten into, as we just articulated, the whole um, the facets of all of the different religions and how they've basically all been infiltrated, and they present to us a completely different picture than what has happened in the past we didn't even know. Like, again, Southeast Asia was an area that I thought I knew a lot about. I had no idea that the Catholic Church involuntarily propagandized and psyopsed over 1 million people into a forced migration into southern Vietnam. I had no idea about that. This Thy Will Be Done book was the first well-documented infiltration of the Protestant religion that I've come across. And through the SIL Language Institute, the Wycliffe, which was a Christian college, basically the Rockefellers bought these entities and they are using them throughout Latin America to infiltrate indigenous Indians, to slaughter them, just wipe them out in mass. And again, that is very much like the Phoenix program that we found in Vietnam. And then, of course, I just recently found the first use of the Phoenix program, which was in Malaya by the UK. So we focus a lot on patterns, and this is a pattern. They're not picky about which religion that they're going to infiltrate and use, because they do it regardless of which religion it is. And they use it in order to, bottom line, steal all of this shit and make us indebted, if not dead, slaves to them. And so that's kind of where we're going to move after we get done with the Prelude to Terror, is kind of just do a few sessions. I'm not going to go through the book as extensively as I do this one. This one is so important to me because it brings together out of the words of actual CIA agents, which I don't want to not get on the record. Oh, and by the way, just that reminded me, I have been talking with someone behind the scenes that is going to go through, starting with the Alpha Warrior Gladio series, and translate those into actual written words. So for people who like reading, you will have that available. He finished the first one up that I have to finish reading just to see, you know, how it flows and stuff. And
one step closer to a book, just saying.
Bridget and her book. So anyway, that's a very exciting as far as I'm concerned, because there are some people, and I would be one of them, that prefers to read as opposed to watch videos. And that will allow us to play both of those audiences with this information. Plus, it allows it to reside somewhere in forever. I just don't know what venue we're going to publish those in, so I will let you know. Miles, go ahead.
Colonel, your thoughts on a couple items here. First of all, the Whitaker appointment, and then second, this Chinese freighter just happened to drop their anchor in the right spot, or the wrong spot, however you look at it, and cut off communications.
Where did they drop their anchor? What are you talking about?
Oh, there was some cables under the water, and they dropped their anchor, and it cut off communications to NATO.
Okay, so I can't comment on that. I've not heard anything about it.
Yeah, that was a recent event, but what are your thoughts about Whitaker?
I love Whitaker.
Yeah, so do I.
So I think he definitely is someone that's on the right side of where we all hope we're going. So I'll have to look into the I would love it if they could cut off communications to NATO. I think we would all be much safer.
I know, I was laughing about that. CanCon was talking about it too. He was laughing. He's going, oh God, how did that freighter get there? And they've asked them to move. They want them to come into port. And they go, no, we're just going to sit here until the 20th.
So I'm sure that's not an accident.
Oh my God, that's priceless.
I know, right? Yeah, that's awesome.
I think Kim, Kim and Z are funny as hell. I really do. I cannot stop giggling every time they say something. And Putin as well, because if you really listen to what they're saying, and I don't, the foreign channels, by the way, are much more forthright. So you won't actually hear what they're saying on any of the American channels. But if you actually pay attention to what they're saying, absolutely trolling, funny as hell, funny. I honestly, every time I listen to them, I just laugh. I really do. And Trump is trolling back too. This whole, 100% tariffs on BRICS countries and all of that. Well, no, that's not going to happen. And the reason why it's not going to happen is 90% of our goods, vitamins, medicines, rare earth minerals, uranium, come from those BRICS countries. So all they have to do is say, okay, we just won't sell to you anymore. And they don't have to, because these BRICS countries have accumulated more wealth than the G7 or G20 or whatever the hell they're called this week. They've accumulated more wealth than any of us. So, but they're just laughing.
Don't you think that that's kind of the whole impetus behind this, that they cut us off and then we have to develop those industries here? Because we have uranium. We have all of that shit.
Oh, absolutely.
So the way that you transition us into doing that is by creating these quote unquote problems. And you do that, and then that gives you the impetus to transition us back into being self-sufficient, which is the whole madness behind this, right?
Yeah, I just hope they don't do it too quick, because I still need parts for the truck.
Yeah, I obviously I think there's a plan from that perspective, and I think that but I do see that where we're going. I see that's the end destination, is that we're going to create the crisis, almost use their own playbook, right? Create the crisis so that you can deliver the solution. But in this case, it's a good solution that leads to long-term independence and self-sufficiency of the United States, and gets us back to where we should have been, if we would have left off 100 years ago. I do see, by the way, and I'll just say that because I think we're getting to the end. Yeah, we're at 6. So I do see this as, in each case, and Cousin It, you are exactly right. We are using their playbook. There is almost a reverse Operation Gladio going on, as the whole Hunter Biden pardon, all of this stuff is going to unfold, leaving them holding the bag. And go ahead.
I'm sorry. Speaking of Hunter Biden's pardon, right? Did you see, I don't know if this is bullshit or not, that the DOJ is actually rejecting it? What the hell is that?
Well, you know why? I mean, they can't reject it technically, because but again, this is a play. So the Hunter Biden pardon will open him up to having zero reasons to be able to decline testifying in front of Congress or in a grand jury or in a court, right? So he's no longer under jeopardy, so he can't claim the fifth. He has to testify. They're all panicked as a result of that. They are not going to want him because, as we have said, the entire Gladio operation to overthrow Ukraine, which is why the pardon goes back to 2014, because that was the CIA coup. You can look at Hunter Biden as the CIA front guy. I mean, if he wasn't actually in the CIA, I would be totally shocked if to find out that he was not an asset or an agent, one way or the other. He was the lead guy. So keep in mind Operation Gladio, the whole tactics. You go into a country, you overthrow the government, like in Chile, and you own the mines, you own the telephone company, all of the stuff that had been taken from you, you take back, plus 10 other industries. So the whole idea of having this coup is so that you can go steal all of the resources. That's basically what they thought they were doing in 1991 to Russia, the Soviet Union turning into Russia, is they were going to go in there and all of their quote unquote oligarchs was going to take all of the resources and resell them to American companies. And that's where the Safra guy came in and the Broward guy, all at Hermitage Capital, all that stuff. That's what they were going to do. So that's what happened in Ukraine. And Hunter was the point man. Hunter went in there, as well as the other kids from the politicians went in there, Kerry's stepson, blah, blah, blah. And they were basically going to operate as the gangsters, buying up all the resources there for the American international syndicate, or the West. We won't say American because it's not just America. So that's the reason why that pardon goes back to 2014, is to cover the CIA coup forward and all of his criminal activity. Well, if Biden's pardon stands, then he can now testify on all of it, the CIA operation, the aftermath of the CIA operation, and all of the shit that happened in the next 10 years relating to his activity in that regard. So the DOJ is full of the people that were responsible for all of that shit being covered up in the first place. So they're not going to take this well. Jake Sullivan is not going to take this well because he was part of the entire thing. Victoria Nuland's not going to take it well. So they all know what the pardon does. And it spells doom and gloom for all of them. So thank you for bringing that up, Cousin It. Miles, and then I got to go.
Yeah, using their playbook against them, I love it. Where it also sets the narrative, and I even put this out. I was saying, President Red Pill strikes again. I mean, he put out a big red pill to the other side going, wait a minute, I thought Trump was going to do stuff like this. Why is our guy doing stuff like this?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's backfiring on it. It's like a boomerang effect that we've been under for a long time, which is very enjoyable. Thanks, Colonel.
It is. But it's like Cousin It just talked about reading the Russian newspapers and stuff and listening to the translated versions of these people talking. You have to chuckle. And the only way we know what we know is because of the research that we've done. But you can definitely see a pattern start appearing in these last, I don't know, 3 or 4 big moves that has happened, not just with the naming of the potential cabinet people, but the things that the Democrats have done to themselves. And I have said this repeatedly. If you were designing a operation you would have to explain to me what you would do differently than what has been happening as it's unfolded. Like, for example, the whole rerunning of the 1968 election, where you have the vice president having never gotten a vote after they've screamed for 4 years about defending democracy, and they have an election that has zero to do with democracy at all because she never even got a vote in the primary. And there's just so many of those things that if you had actually designed a waking up of the ignorance of America, I don't know what you would do differently, because so many people has woke up as a result of everything that has unfolded. And I'm not one of those people that say that, this whole thing was orchestrated or planned. I don't believe that. But I do believe that in wargaming, there is a way in which you can construct scenarios that forces your opponent into one or two options, neither of which is good for them. And of course, I think that's what's been done to us for so long. And I definitely see that that has happened in reverse. And I definitely have to say I'm with Cousin Ed on this. I'm enjoying the hell out of it. So anyway, having said that, we're going to take up tomorrow at 4:00. So I may be a few minutes late. I have a vet appointment, and hopefully I'll be back right at 4. But if I'm a few minutes late, just understand that I will be along shortly. And thank you all for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. And I don't see Frog. I don't know whether we're doing tonight or not. Hopefully we're doing the pond at 8:30.
They're probably recovering. Did you see yesterday Stellar posted a space that went for 12 hours and
No.
55 minutes?
No, I was preparing and doing the Badlander get together. I was not even on the internet very much at all yesterday.
It was hysterical. I'd pop out in and out, because obviously I've got shit to do, right? 12 hours and 55 minutes. They were
Wow.
still going ahead at 12:30 last night.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So
that's
we don't
probably
know.
why Stellar's not here.
So we don't know. So I may or may not be back at 8:30. Otherwise, we will be back tomorrow at 4 or shortly after. Thank you all for being here.
One last point, Colonel.
Sure.
If we follow the playbook and that subpoena does come, don't be surprised if suicided or drug overdose.
Don't be surprised if the Gladio operators are called in, is what you just said.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have a pattern. We've established that pattern as well. Thank you, SR71, for letting us go out on that happy note. Anyway, see you guys tomorrow. See ya. Thanks for being here.